Hi, my name's Elaine Chambers and I'm studying Level 5 Special Needs Assistant with Aspire Training. This is my presentation on my first assignment brief, which is I had to choose a special need, and I have chosen ADHD as my special need because it's very close to my heart. And my daughter and my nephews were all diagnosed with ADHD from a very young age, and they're adults now, so I have first-hand experience and knowledge of the same. So I will start. So definition I got from ADHD Ireland. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a medical neurobiological disorder in which the brain's neurotransmitter chemicals, noradrenaline and dopamine, do not mix properly. It is an ongoing pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity and impulsivity that interferes with functions of development. It is a disorder that without proper identification, treatment and management can have serious and long-lasting consequences and or complications for the individual. It is genetic and a long-term condition which affects learning and behaviour right through school years and in many cases beyond into adulthood. ADHD is a disorder that can coexist to a greater or lesser degree with any or other disorders such as dyslexia, autism, learning disorder or oppositional defiant disorder. Signs and symptoms. It's usually described as being made up of three core behaviours: predominantly inattentive type problems of inattention, distractibility, short-term memory and learning; predominantly hyperactivity type impulsive, poorly self-monitored behaviour. Combined type children with ADHD or ADD fall into this category. So inattentiveness can be confusing because of a selectivity. The child who is extremely inattentive while doing schoolwork may be fully focused when playing games or carrying out practical procedures or when being tested by a psychologist. Being unable to sit still, especially in camera quiet surroundings, a short attention span, easily distracted, careless mistakes, appearing forgetful or losing things, being unable to stick to, listen or carry out instructions, constantly changing activity or task, having difficulty organising tasks, inattention to verbal instructions and short-term memory. Hyperactivity and impulsiveness. Being unable to sit still, constantly fidgeting, excessive physical movement, excessive talking, being unable to wait their turn, acting without thinking, interrupting conversations, little or no sense of danger. The main symptoms for adults: carelessness and lack of attention to detail, constantly starting new tasks before finishing old ones, inability to focus or prioritise, constantly losing or misplacing things, forgetfulness, difficulty keeping quiet and speaking out of turn, blurting out responses and often interrupting others, mood swings, irritability and quick temper, inability to deal with stress, extreme impatience, taking risks and activities, often with little or no regard for their personal safety or the safety of others. An example of that would be dangerous driving. Now, this is a list of symptoms and signs of ADHD from my daughter Michaela, who is now 22 but was diagnosed when she was 4 years of age. So this is from her childhood and still suffering in adulthood. Time blindness, an inability to sense the passing of time. This is more a sensory issue and not an intentional disregard for time. And imposter syndrome, feeling anxious and not experiencing success internally despite being high performing in external objective ways. People with ADHD feel like a fraud or a phony and doubt their own abilities. Masking, hiding your adult ADHD symptoms from other people, basically trying to appear normal or regular. Hyperfocus, defined as clinical phenomenon of locking onto a task. People with ADHD have difficulty shifting their attention from one subject to another, especially if the subject is about their interests. Stimming or self-stimulatory behaviour is repetitive or unusual body movements or noises. Examples would be staring into space, spinning objects, clearing throat constantly, chewing, biting nails, repeating sounds, chewing inside their cheeks, drawing, excessive giggling, and rubbing fingers together. Insomnia, zoning out, spacing out, the experience of involuntary losing a focus on a task, difficulty paying attention or focusing, such as when reading or listening to others. Hoarding, persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of their actual value. Dermatillomania, excessive skin picking, cannot stop, it leads to bleeding. Pain is felt when doing it, but not doing it. Pain is not felt while doing it, but only afterwards. Trichotillomania, irresistible recurrent urges to pull out the hair from the scalp, eyebrows, or other areas of the body despite trying to stop. Burnout, cycle of overcommitting or overextending that leads to fatigue. It involves taking on too many tasks or commitments and the subsequent exhaustion that happens when we're unable to fulfill all of our obligations. Sleep apnea is when your breathing stops and starts while you're asleep. Binge eating or overeating. Racing thoughts can be a mental manifestation of restlessness, a result of your brain's unique self-regulation process. ADHD oversharing personal information and maybe impulsive and doesn't think as to what they're saying. Sensory overload, the five senses, sight, hearing, smell, touch and taste, take in more information than the brain can process. When the brain is overwhelmed by this input, it enters fight, flight or freeze mode in response to what feels like a crisis, making the person feel unsafe or panicky. Dyscalculia, a learning disorder that affects them to understand math, number-based information. Object permanence, people with ADHD are more likely to forget important tasks, objects and people when they're not present. ADHD paralysis happens when a person is overwhelmed by their environment or the amount of information given, so they freeze and aren't able to function effectively. ADHD meltdown, sudden outbursts of frustration or anger that seem to come out of nowhere. RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, people with this develop behaviours and mental health issues that stem from their fear of rejection. Children with these face potential problems with low self-esteem, fear of failure, and severe social anxiety. The diagnosis. Early diagnosis is important for the right support to be received. If you think your child or yourself may have ADHD, you should firstly contact your GP to discuss your concerns and seek a referral. Your doctor will usually refer you to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a paediatrician for assessment. Diagnosing ADHD and any coexisting conditions is complicated and much like putting together a puzzle. An accurate diagnosis requires an assessment by a well-trained and experienced professional. The professional will compile a case history, including when symptoms began and how long they've persisted. Parents and teachers will usually help if the children is under 18, and you'll be asked to fill out a questionnaire. In adults, information from an external source, such as a parent or a sibling, may usually be asked to access the individual's history and how the symptoms affect them at different stages of their life. Assessments can often include medical and psychological evaluations, but at the very minimum, they will include a clinical interview. Each specialist differs in their approach. However, this does not mean that the diagnosis is not accurate or valid. There are strict restriction criteria for ADHD, which draws the line of demarcation between ADHD and other conditions. ADHD will affect everyone differently, and people with ADHD often have coexisting conditions, so assessments must be flexible and adapt to the specific individual. Inclusion in the classroom. Accommodations can be made to include the child with ADHD in the classroom. By giving positive reinforcement and feedback, giving extra time on projects and tests, tailor instructions and assignments to the child's need. Use technology to help with tasks, allow extra breaks or time to move around. Change the environment to limit distractions, give extra help on staying focused. Supply a fidget toy to help with the child stay focused. One of my own daughter's referrals. The role of the SNA specifically with ADHD. An SNA plays an important role in assisting the teacher to support students with special educational needs who have significant care needs. Now, one of the main principles of the SNA working with the child with ADHD is to keep the child focused on the tasks at hand and to try and prevent him or her from becoming distracted and interfering with other children's learning in the class. It is vital that the SNA builds up a positive relationship with the child, as the child will be then more likely to comply with the SNA requests. Usually the SNA sits beside the child, helping them organise themselves. For example, if the teacher asks the class to take out their English reader, well, the SNA will ensure that the child with ADHD does so. Then we'll offer plenty of praise and encouragement to the child to help the child to do things more independently. The SNA may escort the child to the resource teacher, to parents at home time, or anywhere where the child must go unsupervised. If the child is on short-acting medication, the SNA may help him or her to manage this, but training must be given in advance of doing so. It is important to note that ADHD is a very treatable condition if diagnosed and properly treated. People with ADHD can reach their potential and lead happy and successful lives. The more ADHD is highlighted and talked about, especially by celebrities, the more it takes away the stigma that has been attached to it for years. This has been publicly highlighted by many famous people who have talked openly about their diagnosis and living with ADHD, including Shawn Ryder, the singer, Howie Mandel, a judge on America's Got Talent, Jamie Oliver, a chef, Bill Gates, the owner of Microsoft, Michael Phelps, an Olympic swimmer, Richard Branson, the owner of Virgin, Jim Carrey, an actor, Johnny Depp, an actor, Robbie Williams, the singer, and that's to name but a few. There's loads. ADHD has now also been highlighted in television. An example would be in the soaps EastEnders. It aired an episode showing an emotional conversation between a teacher and his now former pupil. The past pupil was telling the teacher that he didn't like how he was treated by him when he was at school. The teacher apologised to him, telling him he didn't recognise his symptoms in the classroom years ago before as ADHD. He believed it was naughty child syndrome, and that was a term that was used many years ago for any child displaying these symptoms, and not a real disorder, which led him to not teaching the pupil properly. Thankfully, times are changing for people.